Welcome, everybody, to a roundtable topic that's been long overdue to speak on: education, disability, and athletics. More specifically, why are there so few university-based programs that offer scholarship programs for disabled students? In my research, I found many opportunities for the disabled to go get an education, but only a real few opportunities for those to go there and not only get an education, but use their athletic abilities as well. You know, guys, I can recall when I was going to Cal State Beach way back in the 80s, they were very happy down at Disabled Student Services to give me a couple $100 to go to a track meet, but they weren't forward thinking enough to ever consider having, a full scholarship program like that at the U of I. And we're going to jump right into this. But before we get going, I'd like to introduce our panel today. Really, really well esteemed and qualified. Darlene Hunter is an assistant professor at University of Texas, where she teaches a course on disability and work. She's earned a master's in social work and a PhD in family studies. And while maintaining her academic schedule, she also excelled in wheelchair basketball, earning both Paralympic bronze and gold. NWBA Hall of Famer Mike Frogley earned a master's in science in education from the University of Wisconsin Whitewater, where he also coached the collegiate wheelchair basketball team. Mike went on to coach Team Canada as they won back-to-back golds in 2000 and 2004 Paralympics. And last but not least is a pioneer and trendsetter in the wheelchair racing sports basketball world. Yeah, don't be embarrassed, Brad, because you are. Brad Hedrick, who has several degrees, including a PhD in leisure studies from the University of Illinois, where he incidentally succeeded the legendary Tim Nugent as the director of disabled resources and educational services. Athletically, Hedrick earned 2 Paralympic medals, but more importantly, he coached the '88 wheelchair women's basketball team to gold. Welcome, everybody.
Thanks, Bob. Good to be here.
Hey, let's jump right in. I had the opportunity really to, really study up on you guys and the topic and the statistical data regarding disability and education. And it seems to me, as I went through, there are a whole lot of universities that offer opportunities for people to go to school, but there are very few scholarship programs like that was started at the U of I, where you can both incorporate academics and athletics into one package. So, Brad Hedrick, I'd like to start with you. You spearheaded the program after Dr. Nugent, and you guys more or less laid the template, so to speak. What do you see as the inhibiting factors that have stood in the way of other universities finding the same value in what the University of Illinois did?
Interesting question. I basically, through my tenure, and I'd say my last gig in coaching was '96, and then I went off to be an administrator for 20 years. So it's been some time and distance between me and my professional sport involvement. But at that time, and I've seen nothing that has really changed my opinion of it, that whether or not a university gets engaged has little or nothing to do with the global culture of that campus. It is the absolute doggedness of one individual that usually makes something happen. At Illinois, that was Tim Nugent. And I know Texas, Arlington, the coach, I'm blanking right now, of course, on the name that started that. It was always around a person. And at Whitewater, it was predecessor to Truesdale, but there was always one individual that saw great value in it, who went against the currents of big-time athletics and college sport. It's not amateur sport anymore on any college campus. It is a marketing endeavor worth tens of millions of dollars in most campuses. And the recent Paralympics has, I think, started to turn some of the perception of disability in athletics and to position persons with disabilities as capable and actually world-class athletes. But that's fairly new phenomenon. And on most campuses, it's a dollars and cents thing when it's not driven by legislative mandate. Meaning, if you can put people in seats, you're going to have leverage. And if you can't get people in seats, then you don't have a lot of leverage.
I'm just going to follow up, Brad, real quick. Let me follow up on that because I remember 30 years ago, I came to the University of Illinois and saw how the program was running under Marty Morris. And I'm just stunned. Here we are. I mean, 3 decades later, we've made strides, as the rest of you are about to attest to, but we're still seemingly a little bit stalled. Why haven't people picked up on, beyond the persistence that it takes to make a program work, why haven't we moved forward?
Well, it's exposure. It's still, the programs are still relatively sparsely distributed. We're not efficient in bringing programming to people with disabilities throughout the population. We don't have a lot of investment in pedagogy and understanding sports science as it applies to people with myriad disabilities and how to bring out the athletic talent and maximize that talent. We have centers of excellence in doing it, but they're still few and far between. There just aren't that many. And
Brad, it's really interesting that a little bit earlier you talked a little bit about the funding and the money and the tens of thousands. It's probably millions of dollars when you look at the NCAA tournament. And I want to kick this around with Darlene and Coach Frogley. You guys have both been a significant part of collegiate programs. You're both very passionate about, not only your academics, but your athletics. So, why is it, do you think, that these large athletic programs, when you look at these NCAA tournaments for, say, basketball, where teams like UCLA and Duke, they have such immense success and that they're making tremendous amounts of money, why is it that they haven't grasped the concept that this would be a good thing? Darlene?
I think it's a few things, like how do we value disability in the United States to begin with, right? We just have to look at our culture of disability and how we see people. We see disability as more of a victim's mentality in the United States and not one that is going to allow us to triumph and see the purpose in putting people in school, first off, in academia. And then once we get there, like Brad was talking about, it's a champion person, one person who is going to stand behind it and go through all that administration. Administration at the collegiate level is super hard to get through. It takes years of persistence. I know, if you can look at every program, Ryan Martin and CUNY just started a brand new program, Men and Women, and it was his position that he had there originally and working that started that CUNY program in this last year. So it's a champion, and then it's a drive of finances. Right now, COVID has not helped our mission at all because, there's less people attending universities. And when we're looking at administration and getting butts in seats, where is that funding coming from? And people aren't attending college as much during COVID. So it's another problem. And then we look at us as a high-risk population, trying to open these doors in the last few years haven't really been there. We are having more conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusions in colleges, and that's helping us having to reach, the disabled population and the services that we could provide. But until our government really changes policies and really puts a law behind it, I just don't think that we're going to have as much change as we hope for.
Hey, thanks, Darlene. And really quick, Mike, before you jump in on this, I want to go ahead and introduce our fourth panelist who managed to join us, Abu Yilla. It's been so many years, my friend. How you been?
the question of the NCAA picking up, or any other sports bodies picking up on disability sport. And for me, fundamentally, other countries have adopted the Paralympics as part of their sports culture. If I was going to take Great Britain, for example, where I started competing, then now Paralympians receive similar support, not as much, as Olympians, because the whole Olympic movement now in Britain is funded by a national lottery. So, by extension, if the national lottery supported the Olympics, it should also support the Paralympics. And that was the logic of the people in Britain. Consequently, there's a lot of money, multi-millions, put into Paralympic sport in Great Britain. And that goes on to inform the population because they see it as part of their cultural contribution. Consequently, Paralympic athletes in Britain can be full-time, but the point is they're accepted as part of the sports movement. In this country, disability sport in general hasn't been seen as part of legitimate sport. And I think that's in part because of our focus on the Special Olympics, which is different from Paralympics. And trying to explain that difference is incredibly complex and unnecessary. Other countries, because Paralympic sport is part of the culture, it permeates the whole culture. And athletes
Abu, let me jump in really quick because you said something I think that really pertains well to Coach Frogley. Mike, Abu referred to a culture, making a difference. And, when we started to travel around doing shows, I learned pretty quickly that there was a much higher level of respect in Canada for the disabled athlete. How did it catch on so quickly up there, and what was the difference?
So I think it's really interesting, Abuba, your discussion about sport culture, because I think that's a challenge in Canada, where overall as a country we don't value sports contributions in the same way we see similar countries like Australia, for example, which is a rabid sport culture there. What I would say, where we were able to, and I say were, I don't think we're in the same place now, where we were able to be successful in the Paralympics in the past, that stemmed not from necessarily a value of sport culture as maybe the more progressive view we had about inclusion in society overall. And that ties back to some deeply rooted things that Canadians had to learn about, including everybody, just to survive in the type of environment that we have. And so I think that lent itself to us including people of more diverse descriptions and abilities and characteristics. And that lent itself to us having some early success in the Paralympics. To your point about sport culture and the value of Paralympic sport changing worldwide, I think Canada has fallen behind in that. And I don't think we fund as well. And I don't think we support our athletes to the same extent. I think there's to a great extent, we're sort of resting on our laurels, if you will. We think that we are good because we were good, but that's actually not the case anymore.
Wow, that's pretty astounding to hear, Mike, because I can always remember, and those of us who have gone to the Paralympics, 88, 92, 96, hearing about how the Canadian athlete was paid for a gold and a silver and a bronze medal. And, here we were stateside, scrapping and begging for money, going to Rotary clubs and Lions clubs. And, God bless them, they were giving us money. But the bottom line was, we were digging for charity to buy buy a plane ticket to go to the Paralympics after we worked for 4 years. I mean, how do we address that? Brad, can you jump in here?
Well, I think government funding has been brought up here in a couple of statements, help to give the a significant level of funding for disability sport. That this private mentality of funding in the United States suppressed, because if you couldn't generate private income and advertising income, and having been a part of the '84 Games debacle and the conflict of the USOC and the Paralympic effort, which all hinged on marketing and advertising and how much of that money would be lost, and could you go into competition with our advertisers and sponsors, and the challenge of that have really suppressed the funding and the awareness and the quality in the United States. And we may, just through the more recent reorganization and again, some of this growing media attention, be able to start to hit some critical mass and escape that orbit finally in the U.S. But it is continually pulling. That the exposure isn't there to promote the awareness of the athleticism, and to change the culture. That was part of Nugent's model all along at Illinois, that his statement was always, I could give a lifetime of lectures and it would make no difference in the attitudes about disability, but I can have one exhibition game and I'll change the perception of everyone that's there and present and watching in 40 minutes. And it's the power of sport, but if no one sees it, then the power is removed. And so I do think the efforts such as this, every effort in media to draw attention to the need and the of inclusion and opportunity for disability, and sports science and disability, and Paralympic and athletic and programmatic support. Those are the kind of things that ultimately can bring change about.
Hey guys, I want to go ahead and run this round the table because I think and I want to start with Darlene, because Darlene, you're on the front lines right now. You're the youngest one of the bunch. You're still playing ball. You're teaching. You're you're at the university level. You feel as well as Abu. You're there. You're on the front lines. So I hate to keep using teams like UCLA, but this is a huge program. We always see them in the final. At least the Elite Eight, the Sweet 16. They're right there. If UCLA came to you, their administrators, and they said, sell me on a scholarship program, convince me, why should we, support a wheelchair basketball team, a wheelchair track team, a rugby team? Why? Sell that administrator on this concept.
Well, we do know that once people with disabilities right now, if we're unemployed, we're taking a lot more money out of our government system. And we have found, research has showed, Michael Cunningham has a lot of research that shows that once you get an education as a person with a disability and participate in sports through your life, you are more likely to get a job. I think it's like 6 times more likely to get a job. I'd have to look at a stat. But you get a job, and then the amount of money that we could bring back every year by paying taxes and paying into the system from having a job and education is worth it, right? And so and what does that do for your school and standing up and saying, hey, we're supporting people with disabilities, getting education, getting in the workforce, which is then in turn paying our taxes and giving back to society and moving us up into a social model versus the medical model in which we're operating in the United States when we look at disability. And so we just need to really invest in all people, because as a society as a whole, if we look at our unemployment rate right now, it's very high. And so if we can get disability that, I think it's at like less than 20% of people with disabilities are employed right now, that's a huge population that can, get a job and be productive members of our society and paying taxes.
I couldn't agree more. Let's keep running this round table. Coach Frogley, you're going to sell this program. Tell us how you're going to do this.
Well, if we're going to use UCLA as the example, then I'm probably going to tap into maybe their more baser instincts, and I'm probably going to say in 2028 you're going to be hosting the Olympics and Paralympics in LA. Wouldn't it be awesome if there was a gold medalist in a Paralympic sport that was from UCLA? How much would that go towards the profile of UCLA as a progressive university on the West Coast? And how much would that mean to, donors, alumni from the university, from UCLA? And I'd probably lean towards that. Absolutely include Darlene's points. Those are real points and they should never be overlooked. But sometimes we don't have people that are as broad thinking or maybe as forward thinking. And they're in the university community on what I'll say is the business side that Brad touched on. And they're seeing it as they've got a certain amount of money they're going to spend and they want to get the maximum amount of value for that in order to meet their mandate. And I think having somebody in, say, the T54 class win the 100-meter sprint and be a current or former UCLA student athlete would look really good to UCLA. And that's a reason why they should probably begin to start doing that now. And what's interesting is those discussions are actually taking place on this campus, right on that campus right now. They're talking about what would be their involvement from a more extensive level or an extensive way relative to Paralympic sport on that campus, and moving out of just some of the programs they're running right now and trying to expand what they're doing. And a lot of it is tied to the value that 2028 can place on those programs and notoriety and that it can bring to UCLA.
Abu, Yilla, it looks like you're ready to jump in on this. What do you got to say? How do you sell our program?
I can't. I can't because the issue is so much larger than any individual unit. I agree with what Darlene was saying on selling the employability of people with disabilities, but the temptation to a major university to have a Paralympic gold medalist on campus is not very high. So I don't think that argument would sway anyone in administration. It would be more speaking to diversity, welcoming more people into this joyous thing we call sport would be a better example. But why I was looking to jump in was that UTA has a very interesting story in why it developed a wheelchair basketball team in the first place. And that was that Jim Hayes, the founder, got a couple of senior administrators into wheelchairs and had them go around the campus. Well, one of those senior administrators was the president of UTA, called Bob Witt, who went to become the president of Alabama. And one of the first mandates he put out was, we are going to have a wheelchair basketball team on this campus, fully funded. And if you are recruiting an athlete, I want to see them. Can you imagine that? Being recruited and taken to the president of the university to say welcome. And
well,
now,
Abu, I think that's I think conceptually that's a great idea. And Darlene, it sounds like you're definitely riding in alignment with what Abu was saying. Did you want to follow up on that?
It's a hard thing to sell all at one time. And it's a cultural change. Like, as we started off with this conversation, we have to, going back to, like, even when we talk about funding, like, Toyota, thank God, stepped up for us this last year in NBC in the United States. And that's how we've started getting Paralympics actually out in front of people. And when I came back from 2012 and 2016 Paralympics, I would go around and tell people I won a gold in 2016 Paralympics and no one knew what it was. So I think we're on the verge and we're in that upward trajectory right now with LA coming and we're, maybe Winter Olympics in the future after that, where Paralympics is in the forefront and it's an easier sell than it has been in the past. But the bureaucracy and government of it and administration is just really hard when we talk about funding and where are you going to pull that money? And that's where, can you make partnerships is a bigger conversation of can you make partnerships with outside organizations that would be willing, just like when we look at the football field as, sponsored by AT&T or whoever, would they be wanting to sponsor an adaptive program in a college at that level is an easier way to, consider that. It's just a sustainability year after year to make sure when you sign on a student, you're signing them on for 5 years as paying a full ride scholarship. Does your program support that?
The common denominator that I keep hearing here as we keep rounding, around the campfire is money. So is that really the bottom line? If a wheelchair basketball team or a Tatiana McFadden can generate enough exposure and money for a program, is that the litmus test for success? Is that how we get to the next level?
No. Sorry, Brad. Keep going.
Hey, Brad. Let Abu jump in here. I'd like to hear what he has to say about this.
No, because it's the lack of value. It's a much larger question about the valuing of people with disabilities, but also valuing sporting achievements in the Paralympics. It's chicken and egg. If the US valued Paralympic sport, then everything else would follow, including funding. To me, funding's the second step after you get the American population to value disability sport success. And one big barrier to that is the presence of the Special Olympics. I don't want to be controversial, but most Americans...
But Abu, it is controversial,
yeah.
Whether you like it or not.
Well, most Americans have heard of the Special Olympics.
Undoubtedly.
And for them, that is disability sport. We know that the Paralympics is qualitatively different than the Special Olympics. So unlike most countries, we have to get over the resistance barrier of Americans seeing disability sport as Special Olympics, but rather to see it as elite competition. And to me, that's our challenge even before we get to funding, because if we can get that value, then the funding comes along, the different institutions come along and are prepared to be part of that. In my team that I played for and ran, the Dallas Wheelchair Mavericks, we were of value to a rehabilitation hospital because they saw us as the end point of the rehabilitative process, and therefore something worthy of funding and providing awareness of. So if we can get enough people more aware of the value of Paralympic sport and can place it into elite athletics, everything else will follow.
That's a pretty interesting concept, Abu. I think a lot of times, when we hear things like that, we immediately go to a place of easier said than done. But who knows? I mean, it all starts with a vision. And, guys, I think we could sit here and probably, run this round and round for quite some time. I think we're all very passionate about this. We relish education. We've all risen to very high levels as athletes, and there are still a lot of challenges, facing this topic. But as we round this up, I'd like to hear from each one of you, and let's go ahead and start out with Darlene. When you have a vision of what the next step is, I mean, where do we go? Let's take all that water from under the bridge, our connection to different types of athletes and money and everything else. What's the next step? How do we tangibly reach out for the next place and the next step to go?
I think we first have to start with our youth, and they have to, start being involved in their middle school and high school programs so that we show a need to colleges to provide these opportunities. And we need them to be a part of their able-bodied teams and educating as they go up. We have to go to our PTs, our OTs, our nurses, and our doctors and make this part of their curriculum so that when they are seeing people, they can, with disabilities, encourage them to participate, because we know it's a health benefit, not just physically, but emotionally and as well. And then I think that we just have to, as a population of people with disabilities, demand more. I think we say here, we're going to accept what anybody gives us because we didn't, ADA was signed in 1990. And before that, we didn't have our rights as people with disabilities, really. And when we demanded our rights and crawled up the steps of the Capitol building, we got ADA signed. So it's another time that we all have to get together as an organization of people and say, we demand the right to do sports and show that we want to do this. I think it's on us as well, is that we need to demand more of ourselves as a population to say that this is a need. We want this opportunity and to fight for it. And right now it's kind of like we take what we get and we're happy with it because it's better than nothing at all.
Brad, you've been around the longest of the bunch of us. You've seen these programs right from their infancy. Yeah. Hey, man, I'm not far behind you, so don't worry. Not bagging over here. But you've been around for a long time. I read those comments about, you going to UNC and not even having a curb cut. And I dealt with those same processes at the University of Vermont. So, but nonetheless, you've been around. You've seen these programs in action. What's the next step, tangibly?
Well, I build on what Darlene said. I think we really have to be much more aggressive in intervening with youth, but not solely with youth. I mean, disability crosses the age spectrum, and I live in Myrtle Beach. They think themselves the golf capital of the world, and there are a lot of people that look like me with hips and knees that won't allow them to play. And it's interesting. I'll go out on a cart. I play on a solo rider. I can hit the most lovely banana slice, and somebody's going to come by and go, "Damn, that is just marvelous." And I thought, what about that was marvelous? That was one ugly shot. But because I have a disability, it gets back to this idea of a very patronizing and very entrenched view of disability. We've got to begin to kind of, in a kind way, I go out of my way to explain, no, that really isn't the great part of this. That I want the focus to be more on the skillful performance. I think one of the great impediments is still that though we grow programs slowly, our effort to create pedagogically sound curricula to more expeditiously and effectively train is a real problem. Again, going into golf, I have scoured YouTube, and it is useless in terms of any relevant instructional content. And I've now gone about giving up on YouTube and begging sponsors in disability sport to put money in the pot to look at instructional media that is democratically available through the internet, that could be accessed by anyone and built into a Khan Academy of disability sport. I really think that's kind of what we need. If I were to look, I would say the first thing we want to do is get information to people some sort of Khan Academy of adapted sport would be the way I would want to do it. I think secondarily, I was never one to be shy with an administrator to say, if 15% of the population has a disability, you can apply that to your alumni base and your funding base. And most of your funding now is private and not state, and you depend on those alumni. Well, there's a good number of them that aren't giving money to you now that would give money to efforts that align with disability opportunities and athletics. And you can look at, and I would show them that we've been at it for 60 years, and we have $20 million in disability sport between two programs, or disability between two programs, and a portion of that in athletics. That is being minimally tapped by the administration. And I think they look at that finally. You got to get them to think about it in terms of their brand and how that affects their brand as an institution. And then the fact that it would expand their recruitment of alumni donors and philanthropy beyond that, which they currently have mined and accessed. So there's a couple of thoughts where we could step forward and hopefully make some headway.
Well said, Brad. Coach Frogley, you've been there on many different levels. You've been there as a coach. You've been there as a student. You've been there as a Paralympic coach. You've been around the table, man. I mean, you understand where it's been and where it has to go. So give me a few ideas, man. I mean, how do we go to the next place?
Well, I got to first give credit to Coach Hedrick because some of the stuff I think it's stuff that I've sat in his office and he's taught me over all the years. Two things that surface in this that I always remember. He always talked about when we were talking about growing Paralympic sport. One was the importance of critical mass, getting a critical mass involved. And I'll touch on that in a second. And then the second was institutionalization. Darlene, you talked about having the champion on a campus, and I can look back in my brief history with it, and I can see countless campuses that had somebody that started something, and when they left, it died. It never became institutionalized. At U of I, at UTA, at Alabama, it's become institutionalized. It's not up to one person to have a program there anymore. It's seen as something that's valuable by the university community. So in order to have those two things meet each other and see sport grow, first thing is we have to build the base. And we build the base, I think, starting with institutionalizing adapted sport in the school curriculum. I think everybody should be exposed to adapted sport. And then that normalizes it. To your point, Abu, then you know what? Everybody's seen wheelchair basketball. It's just a sport. Everybody plays it. And I think if we do that, then literally every kid grows up knowing that those sports exist. And so if at some point in time they acquire a disability, they know something. If at some point they become the CEO of a Fortune 500 company and they want to invest, they also know about adapted sport and they know it is an elite sport. So I think building the base, I think tied to that, we don't spend enough time building what I would call a welcoming culture in disability sport. That's increasingly becoming an issue in sport overall. We recruit a ton of people, and I'm sure that Coach Hedrick and all of you know of people who you met that started playing the sport and then for some reason they left. We have really low retention rates. I know that when I look at the junior wheelchair basketball division in the NWBA, their retention rate and transfer from juniors to club in the NWBA is not high, not what it is on the able-bodied side. So I think we need to create sport culture that is welcoming and safe. I'll add that piece in too. And then the third piece, and Coach Hedrick talked to this, I'll call it coaching, but yeah, it's being able to teach the sport so that people get the skills they need to participate in the space, in the sport that they want. So those three things. I think you build the base by institutionalizing in schools. I think you create a safe and welcoming climate that keeps people there. And then you give them the tools they need to be able to play in sport in the space that they want to be in.
I didn't get a really ample opportunity to introduce this man, Abu Yilla, but he has a bronze medal from the Paralympics in Seoul, and he's a professor. He's well accomplished. He's been in print many ways in articles. And Abu, here you go, buddy. You got the last word on this. Where do we go from here?
Well, thanks for that. I would point out that I do have a TEDx talk that's out there on YouTube that deals with some issues with sport. But first, I wanted to pick up on what Darlene said as far as engaging youth. I teach a class that's teacher prep for future PE teachers, and a section of the class is on sport. And I finish it by telling them that knowing that Paralympic sport exists could be the most important thing you do to change the lives of your students. Because you hear these stories about someone being found in a supermarket. There's a gold medalist on the sled hockey team who just happened to be in the supermarket at the same time as a sled hockey mom. That's just accidental. So getting the information out, and as I say, with my future PE teachers, I say that could be the most important thing. As far as Brad's comments on instruction, I would point you to the BBC Sports website. It is incredibly inclusive. So when there's a Paralympic story, it shows up. But they have a section on disability sport. And with each article, let's say it's about wheelchair tennis, on the right-hand side, you will see how to get involved. And so the BBC have a how to contact and how to get involved on their main websites. That's a great way for people who even want to think about whether they're going to be athletes with disabilities to get a start. And part of Paralympic funding is for these grassroots movements. So getting our youth involved is large. Unfortunately, the numbers show that for Paralympic athletes specifically, they're a very small percentage of the school communities. The first time I showed Doug Garner, our UTA wheelchair basketball coach, who has been recognized by the president, when I showed him the actual prevalence numbers, he couldn't quite believe it, because it's about 4% of all the people who are in special education fall into those Paralympic categories. By far and away in schools, it is learning disability that's nearly half of that. And you have to go all the way down. Deafness, people with amputations, and you use wheelchairs are classified under orthopedic impairments. And they're a minuscule percentage of the school population. It's still important for them to be aware of it and so on. But if we're talking about critical mass, it's hard to get that. I would suggest school districts to form teams. So you're not going to get a wheelchair basketball team out of one high school, but you could get a wheelchair basketball team out of a district and then have inter-district competition. But we do miss the fact that it's a small percentage in the schools, but it is important to contact them, to get in touch with them.
Undoubtedly, Abu, and I went through a lot of statistical data, and boy, we could sit here and talk about bars and graph charts about, which disabilities get attention and which ones get money. And boy, I'd love to continue that on, but I think we should probably wrap here today. And, I really want to thank all four of you because you're so qualified, well-spoken, and your comments today were very insightful. And I think that this is truly, a step in the direction of really creating a helpful environment where people, maybe can take this a little bit deeper. So once again, thanks to Darlene Hunter, Coach Frogley, Abu Yilla, and certainly Brad Hedrick. You guys have set the bar very high for everybody else. And, I feel confident when I hear your words that we can go to the next place. Thanks, guys.